Snow falls sideways in a blizzard of white knives. The wind claws at the edges of a shattered city. Sevastopol, 1942. Every sound is devoured by the storm. The crack of broken glass, the far-off groan of artillery. In the ruins of a burnt schoolhouse beneath the blackened skeleton of a desk, a woman lies motionless. Her face is streaked with soot and frost. Her rifle, a Mosin-Nagant with a long dark scope, rests beside her like an extension of her spine. Lyudmila Pavlichenko hasn't moved in 72 hours. Not to eat, not to sleep, not even to blink too long. Her lips are cracked, her trigger finger numb. Through her scope, she sees the faint movement of gray uniforms 200 meters ahead, Wehrmacht engineers setting range markers for artillery. She's been waiting for one man, the officer who directs them. He appears now, brushing snow from his mapboard, unaware that in a pile of rubble across the frozen street, death has been breathing beside him for 3 days. A single drop of melted snow runs down the side of her scope. Her heart doesn't quicken. Her breath doesn't change. Time slows into silence. The crosshairs rest on the man's temple, just above the brim of his cap. The Mosin-Nagant exhales once. The officer collapses without a sound. The engineers freeze, their shouts rising into the storm. By the time they look toward the schoolhouse, she's already gone. Her footprint vanishes in the drifting snow, the echo of her shot still rolling through the hills of Sevastopol. In Berlin, that bullet will echo too, in reports that speak of a female ghost sniper who kills with the patience of stone. Her name will pass between soldiers in hushed tones, half legend, half warning. Lady Death. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was not born into war. She was born into competition. 1916, Belaya Tserkov near Kiev. Her father, a factory mechanic. Her mother, a teacher. A small apartment always smelling of metal and soap where her father's rifle leaned in the corner like a family heirloom. From childhood, Lyudmila watched him clean it with the same reverence other men reserved for icons. When she was 14, she begged him to teach her. He laughed once, then handed her the weapon. She hit her first target dead center. The next 10 followed. The 12th she shot through the previous hole. Neighbors whispered that she was reckless. Her mother worried that she'd never marry. But her father said only, "If she aims, don't stand near." By 16, she joined the local WWII marksmanship club, the paramilitary organization that trained civilians for national defense. She learned wind, range, and patience. Most men shot quick. She shot still. Her instructors said she didn't breathe when she fired. She smiled and said, "I do. You just don't see it." When the German invasion began in June 1941, Lyudmila was 24 and studying history at Kiev University. She had the hands of an academic and the eyes of a hunter. The news came with the sound of air raid sirens. The Wehrmacht had crossed the Bug River. Kiev was under threat. Her classmates fled. She went to enlist. The officer behind the desk laughed when she asked for a rifle. "We don't take girls as snipers," he said. She slammed her marksmanship certificate on the table. Voroshilov sharpshooter, first class. He stared at it, then at her. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll see if you can shoot men as well as paper." Her first assignment was with the 25th Rifle Division near Odessa, August 1941. The front was chaos, trenches collapsing under shell fire, men dying faster than replacements arrived. She carried her Mosin-Nagant and a ration of courage she didn't know she had. On her second day, she made her first kill, a German scout who had crawled too close. She watched him through her scope for 30 seconds, finger trembling, before pulling the trigger. When he fell, she whispered an apology. By the end of the week, she stopped whispering. By the end of the month, she stopped counting. The army noticed. Reports listed her as having 40 confirmed kills, then 75, then 100, each shot documented, verified by a witness. Her legend spread faster than her name. The men in her unit began to look at her differently, not as a woman, but as a weapon. One night, a wounded soldier asked her, "Do you ever miss?" She smiled faintly. "Only sleep." By the time Odessa fell, she was already a ghost to the Germans, invisible, patient, unrelenting. Her division retreated to Sevastopol and Lyudmila followed, rifle wrapped in burlap, eyes colder than the Black Sea wind. The sea outside Sevastopol thundered with shells that never stopped falling. The air smelled of stone dust, salt, and cordite. By late 1941, the city had become the beating heart of Soviet resistance in the south. A fortress carved into cliffs and bunkers, half of it already in ruins, all of it defiant. Lyudmila Pavlichenko arrived with the 25th Rifle Division, her rifle slung over her back, her expression carved from exhaustion. The train that brought her in had been bombed twice along the way. The last 5 miles she'd walked, stepping over wreckage that still smoked. What greeted her at the front wasn't glory. It was hunger, fear, and the relentless sound of artillery pounding the earth into memory. Sevastopol's defenders had learned to live underground. Bunkers carved into limestone hills held everything: command posts, kitchens, hospitals, radio rooms. The corridors reeked of sweat and mold. Men slept in shifts, their eyes ringed with fatigue, their faces gaunt from rations measured in crumbs. Lyudmila was assigned to a sniper section operating near the Inkerman Heights, a vantage point overlooking German supply lines. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival through mathematics, distance, wind, time, and patience. Each day she climbed out before dawn, found a nest, and became stone. Each night she crawled back, half frozen, half starved, half alive. The first winter was brutal. Frost ate fingers and bullets alike. The snow turned gray with ash and blood. But in that cold she thrived. While others cursed the chill, she used it. The air was clear, the sound carried differently, the wind steadied her hand. Her kills rose to 187, then 257. Then beyond what anyone stopped recording, she became legend and rumor all at once. German officers began to whisper her name in intercepted communications, the Sevastopol Witch. The Soviet papers called her Lady Death. The truth was simpler. She was tired, and she refused to die. Her spotter, Leonid Kitsenko, a broad-shouldered sergeant with a half-smile that never reached his eyes, became her shadow. They shared coffee brewed from burnt barley, cigarettes rolled from scraps, and the silence of killers who didn't need words. "You breathe too loud," she once told him without looking up. He smiled and said, "You breathe not at all." Together they stalked the enemy through the shattered vineyards and ridges. They learned to recognize patterns, how the Germans moved ammunition at dawn, how their officers leaned over maps before sending men to die. Every detail became data. Every movement became a potential shot. Her most famous duel came in the spring of 1942. For 3 days she hunted a German sniper who had already killed 5 Soviet officers. He was skilled, disciplined, invisible, patient. On the first day she spotted his muzzle flash but couldn't fix the angle. On the second, she found his nest but not his line of fire. On the third, she noticed something small, the faint reflection off his scope, barely a spark in the morning haze. She waited 6 hours not moving, watching that glint until the wind shifted. Then she fired once. When she crawled forward, she found him slumped against a tree, the bullet through his eye. His identification tag read, Major Koenig. Rumor spread that he had been sent from Berlin to hunt her specifically. Whether that was true or not, the effect was real. German snipers began to withdraw whenever her name appeared in reports. Inside Sevastopol, her face was painted on walls, her photo pinned on bunk doors. Soldiers saluted her in passing. She didn't feel like a hero, she felt hollow. Nights were sleepless, haunted by the faces she saw through her scope. She kept a small notebook, writing only dates and distances. No names. "If I remember their names," she said once, "I will stop shooting." By June 1942, Sevastopol was collapsing. The Luftwaffe turned the city to ash, bombing day and night. The earth itself shook. The Black Sea burned with oil from destroyed ships. Her division fell back toward the cliffs. Supplies ran out. Bullets became currency. When her rifle jammed, she cleaned it with her own hair oil. When rations stopped, she boiled grass. Still, she stayed in the fight. Her confirmed kills reached 309, then 314. The final weeks blurred into one endless bombardment, men screaming in tunnels, sky on fire, everything vibrating with the thunder of doom. In late June, near Balaclava Valley, a shell exploded 20 meters from her position. The blast hurled her against a wall, shattering her scope and tearing through her shoulder. Leonid dragged her to cover, his hands slick with her blood. "It's over," he told her. "No," she gasped, "and not yet." But she couldn't lift her rifle. The next morning she was evacuated by sea, one of the last to leave before Sevastopol fell. As the transport ship pulled away, she watched the coastline burn. The cliffs she had defended vanished behind black smoke. She pressed her face to the rail, whispering a single sentence. "I will come back." The records list her confirmed kills at 309, but those who served beside her claimed it was closer to 500. No one knows the real number. What's certain is this: the German advance slowed in her sector. The men she trained would continue her work after she left. And in the heart of every sniper on the Eastern Front, her legend became both burden and beacon. When she reached the hospital in Novorossiysk, her uniform was shredded, her shoulder bandaged with field cloth, her rifle lost in the rubble of Sevastopol. She asked only for one thing in another scope. "You can't go back," the surgeon said. "You've done enough." She turned her head slowly, eyes glassy with morphine. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They're still there." The train from Novorossiysk to Moscow rattled like an empty can across a broken track. Lyudmila sat by the window, her arm wrapped tight against her chest, her uniform still smelling of gunpowder and sea salt. Outside, the endless Russian plain stretched gray and lifeless, scarred by months of war. Every village they passed looked half buried, half burned. Every station held faces too thin for their years. Her reflection in the glass didn't look like the girl from Belaya Surkov anymore. It looked like the ghost of the Black Sea cliffs, eyes hard, mouth set, body made of scars and silence. When she arrived in Moscow, the air felt foreign. The city was alive, trams running, people talking, lights still burning in the distance, but she couldn't hear any of it. Her mind was still in Sevastopol. She kept replaying the last few seconds before the blast, the rumble of the shell, Leonid's hand pulling her down, the sound of her rifle cracking one final time. She remembered watching the officers she'd trained take their positions as the city burned behind them. She remembered the silence that followed. The Kremlin wanted heroes. The propaganda machine was hungry for stories of defiance. Lyudmila Pavlichenko became its perfect meal. The girl sniper of Sevastopol. The headlines read, 309 confirmed kills. She was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Paraded before photographers, her face printed on posters. The papers called her Lady Death. To the world, she was myth made flesh. To herself, she was an echo still listening for gunfire. She met Stalin once. The room smelled of tobacco and ink. He congratulated her, shook her hand, asked about morale. "The men need symbols," he said. "You are one." She nodded but didn't reply. His words rolled off her like snow from a roof. The only thing she remembered from that meeting was the look in his eyes. The cold calculation of a man who saw her not as a soldier, but as a story. When the Americans invited her to speak on behalf of the Soviet Union, she didn't understand at first. "Why me?" she asked the interpreter. "Because you survived," he said. "And because you're famous." In September 1942, she found herself aboard a ship to the United States, her first time leaving her country. Her shoulder still ached. She still woke to phantom gunfire. As the skyline of New York rose from the mist, she stood on the deck, coat whipping in the wind, feeling the strange pull of a world untouched by bombs. The Americans adored her. She toured factories and colleges, met Eleanor Roosevelt, shook hands with senators. The crowd shouted her name, Lyudmila, mispronouncing it every time. At first she smiled. Then she realized they didn't see her. They saw a curiosity. They saw a woman who had killed 300 men and still smiled for the camera. At one rally in Chicago, she stood at the podium, looked out over thousands of faces and said, "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old and I have killed 309 fascist invaders. Don't you think, gentlemen, it is time you stopped hiding behind my back?" The crowd went silent. Then they roared. Behind the applause, she felt nothing. Every city blurred into the next. Washington, New York, Toronto, Ottawa. Banquets, speeches, parades. The same questions. Was it hard to kill? Do women fight well? What's it like to shoot a man? She answered politely, smiling through the flashbulbs. Inside, the sound of the rifle echoed still. The crack that came before the silence, the faint thud that followed. At night, she'd dreamed she was back in her sniper's nest. The wind through broken glass. The scent of limestone dust. Leonid whispering, "Don't breathe yet." She'd wake sweating, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. She and Eleanor Roosevelt became friends. The First Lady saw through the mask, saw the grief beneath the medals. "You remind me of what war truly cost," she told Lyudmila once over tea. Lyudmila said softly, "War costs everything even when you win." By the time she returned to the Soviet Union, she was no longer the same woman who had crawled through the mud of Sevastopol. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold a rifle again. The doctor said it was nerve damage. She knew it was something deeper. She could still see through the scope and still calculate distance, wind, angle. But when she aimed, the world blurred. "You've done enough," her superiors told her. "You can teach now," so she did. At the Central Sniper School, she trained hundreds of new marksmen. She taught them patience, silence, calculation. "You don't shoot a man," she told them. "You shoot his decision to move." But at night, alone in her quarters, she'd open her old notebook, the one from Odessa and Sevastopol, and trace her finger down the list of dates and distances. No names, only numbers. The ink had faded, but the memory hadn't. One winter evening in 1943, she visited a hospital outside Moscow, a ward full of wounded from the Kursk offensive. When she entered, the men sat up straight. "It's her," someone whispered. "Lady Death." She smiled awkwardly, unsure how to carry that name anymore. One young soldier, his face bandaged, asked, "Comrade Pavlichenko, do you still dream of the war?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Every night," she said. "But in my dreams, I'm not shooting. I'm waiting." The boy smiled faintly. "Then maybe the war still needs you." She looked out the window, snow falling over Moscow just as it had fallen over Sevastopol. "No," she said softly. "It only needs memory." The war ended not with victory for her, but with a silence so heavy it felt like drowning. Moscow erupted in fireworks that May of 1945. Red flares rising above the Kremlin towers. Champagne poured in tin cups. Strangers dancing in the streets, shouting until their throats bled. But Lyudmila stood at her window, watching it all as if behind glass. The noise didn't reach her. She could only hear the faint whistle of wind over cliffs, the echo of a single rifle shot rolling down from Sevastopol's ruins 3 years and a lifetime ago. She should have felt joy, pride, relief. Instead, all she felt was absence. Every flash of fireworks looked to her like artillery bursting over the coast. Every cheer like the scream of a wounded man. The more the city celebrated, the more she wanted to go back underground, to the cold stone tunnels where the world made sense, where time only existed between breaths and bullets. She sat down, lit a cigarette, and whispered to the empty room, "We won." But who came back? The following months blurred into reports, meetings, parades. Her image hung in halls, her name written into textbooks, but Lyudmila herself disappeared into a quiet Moscow apartment filled with old uniforms and medals she never wore. She rarely left home. Her hands still shook and her left arm never fully healed. Some nights she tried to write her memories down, but the words betrayed her. The pages filled with numbers, fragments, half-sentences. Inkerman 312. Wind southeast. Leonid. Then she'd stop, close the notebook, light another cigarette. The Veterans Bureau offered her a pension, a small one. Newspapers sometimes sent photographers to remind readers she was alive. Heroine of Sevastopol attends victory parade. They never photographed her eyes. She had learned to smile on command, but behind it there was only quiet fatigue. In 1946, she visited Sevastopol for the first time since her evacuation. The city was barely a city, just a carcass of stone and dust, riddled with twisted metal and the bones of men she had once fought beside. The air still smelled faintly of salt and smoke. She walked the hills alone, finding the old sniper nests by instinct. The bunkers were filled with sand now, their walls covered in graffiti, names, dates, fragments of songs. She found one carving that made her stop. Pavlichenko was here, still watching. It wasn't hers, but it felt like it could have been. She sat down where she had once lain for days, staring through her scope at the same horizon, now empty. The silence was unbearable. She pulled her knees to her chest and whispered to the wind, "They're gone, all of them. You took them and left me behind." The waves crashed against the rocks below, indifferent. For hours she stayed like that. When she finally stood, she took a small brass cartridge from her coat pocket, her last bullet from Sevastopol, and buried it in the sand. "Enough," she said quietly. "Enough now." Back in Moscow, she was offered a teaching post at the military academy. She accepted, because it kept her near the rifle ranges, near the smell of oil and steel. Her students were young, eager, born after the worst years of the war. They looked at her with awe as if she had walked out of legend. Some of them called her Comrade Lady Death behind her back, half in fear, half in admiration. She never corrected them. Instead, she taught them what she wished someone had told her. Patience will save you. Anger will expose you. Compassion will haunt you. She trained hundreds. Some would go on to fight in Korea. Others in conflicts the world forgot. Each time one of her students was killed, she would sit at her desk, take a breath, and add a mark to the edge of her notebook. A quiet tally only she understood. She received visitors from time to time. Foreign journalists, historians, curious admirers. They asked her the same question over and over. What was it like to be a woman sniper? She would smile faintly, the same rehearsed curve of her lips, and answer, like being anyone else who did not wish to die. Her friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt continued through letters. They exchanged stories about peace that neither of them truly believed in. In 1957, she traveled to the United States again, older now, heavier, slower. The press called her the living legend. She hated the phrase. When she saw Eleanor again, the two women embraced without words. "You look tired, Lyudmila," Eleanor said softly. "I am," she replied. "Tired of being a ghost." Years passed. Her medals gathered dust. Her lungs, scarred by years of damp trenches and cigarettes, began to fail. She lived alone with a single cat and a box of letters she never mailed. Every morning she would polish her old Mosin-Nagant, not to use it, but because it was the only thing left that remembered her properly. Sometimes she would take it to the window, rest it on the sill and aim at nothing, just rooftops, clouds, the long empty horizon. Her neighbors grew used to it. Children whispered about the sniper woman who lived upstairs, who never missed a shot even when there was nothing left to shoot. One winter night, as snow fell against the pane and the city slept, she opened her old notebook again. The ink was faded, the paper brittle. She added one final line beneath the long list of dates. "The silence after the shot is the loudest thing in the world." She closed it, set it beside her rifle, and smiled faintly for the first time in years. The years slipped through her fingers like smoke. By the time the 1960s dawned, Moscow had changed beyond recognition. The new city lights shone against steel towers. Trams buzzed through clean streets and children laughed in parks where soldiers had once marched. Yet inside a small apartment on Bolshaya Kommunisticheskaya Street, time stood still. There in the half-light of a curtained room, the last living echo of the Eastern Front lived quietly, surrounded by dust, medals, and silence. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's face had softened with age, but her eyes remained the same, sharp, unyielding, still searching the world as if through a sniper's scope. The war had ended 2 decades earlier, yet it never truly released her. Each night she could hear it, faint, distant like a storm over the sea. The rattle of rifles, the whistle of shells, the final heartbeat of men who had no names. Her neighbors rarely saw her. The postman, an old veteran himself, would salute her every morning out of habit, not expectation. Sometimes young recruits from the academy came by with flowers, hoping to shake her hand. She would thank them softly, then retreat back inside where the ghosts were quieter. The city outside was loud with victory. Her home remained a mausoleum of memory. The Mosin-Nagant still stood in the corner, gleaming from her daily care. She hadn't fired it since the war, but it was the one object that still felt alive. When her hands wrapped around the worn wood of the stock, she could almost feel the pulse of the front again, the way the world held its breath before each shot. She remembered the taste of dust in her mouth, the smell of cordite, the weight of her body pressed against the earth. Every part of her that had been human was still trapped somewhere in those seconds between sight and silence. In 1961, a journalist from Komsomolskaya Pravda came to interview her for a Victory Day retrospective. He was young, ambitious, polite. He called her Comrade Hero. She smiled weakly. He asked, "Do you still think about those days, Lyudmila Mikhailovna?" She laughed softly, a tired sound. "Every day," she said. "It never stops. You don't come back from that kind of silence. You just learn to live beside it." The article that followed painted her as a symbol of endurance, the invincible woman of Sevastopol. But the real story, the one that mattered, wasn't in print. It was the way her voice cracked when she spoke of her comrades, the way her hands trembled slightly when she touched the rifle sling. the way she glanced toward the window mid-sentence, as if she still expected to see a target moving across a distant field. She began to lose her hearing that winter. The doctors called it delayed trauma from concussive blasts. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had once lived by sound, by the rustle of boots, the click of a rifle bolt, the whisper of wind through grass, was now being swallowed by silence. And yet in that silence she found a strange kind of peace. It was as if the war had finally stopped shouting in her head. Her letters to Eleanor Roosevelt stopped coming back after 1962. When the news of Eleanor's passing reached her, Lyudmila sat for a long time at her table, staring at the envelope she'd been about to send. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "You made me believe people could be kind again." Then she burned the letter and watched the smoke drift toward the ceiling, like a signal rising over a dead battlefield. Every morning, she would walk slowly to the park nearby, leaning on her cane. She'd sit on the same bench by the frozen pond, watching children throw snowballs. Some of them would wave. She'd smile and nod, her breath hanging in the cold air. They didn't know who she was. They didn't need to. It was better that way. On one of those mornings, a young cadet approached her. He was barely 20, his uniform freshly pressed. "Comrade Pavlichenko?" he asked shyly. She turned to him, amused by his hesitation. "Yes," she said. He saluted. "My grandfather fought at Sevastopol. He said if I ever met you, I should thank you." She looked at him for a long time before replying. "Tell your grandfather," she began, then stopped. The words caught in her throat. Finally, she smiled faintly. "Tell him I never forgot." As the cadet walked away, she felt something warm spread in her chest. Not pride, not sorrow, but something quieter. Continuity. The idea that the world she had fought for might still exist somewhere, even if it had forgotten her name. That night, she returned home and opened her drawer of old photographs. Faded faces stared back at her. Comrades long buried, their smiles frozen in grainy black and white. She ran her fingers over them one by one. Leonid's picture was still there, creased down the middle. She whispered, "You promised me we'd see the sun rise over Sevastopol again. You were right. I just didn't think I'd see it alone." Outside, snow began to fall, soft, steady, endless. The city lights glowed through the flakes like embers under frost. Lyudmila stood by her window, the same window she had watched the fireworks from years before. She raised a glass of vodka toward the night and whispered, "For all of you who never came home." In the morning, when the caretaker knocked, she didn't answer. He found her seated by the window, still holding the glass, her rifle resting beside her like an old friend. The notebook lay open on her lap. The final line, written in her careful hand, read, "A sniper's bullet ends a heartbeat, but the echo never fades." The caretaker stood there for a long moment, hat in hand as the snow kept falling outside. He didn't call anyone right away. He just looked at her, at the quiet dignity in the way she sat, at the faint smile that still lingered, and then whispered, "Godspeed, comrade." When the papers reported her death, it was only a few lines buried deep in the back pages. "Hero of the Soviet Union Lyudmila Pavlichenko, credited with 309 enemy kills, has passed away in Moscow at age 58. There was no parade, no ceremony, just silence, but somewhere on the cliffs of Sevastopol, where the wind still howled over the Black Sea and the stones still remembered, a faint echo seemed to roll through the air, a single sharp crack of a rifle that no one fired. And then nothing but the sea,